Welcome to Microdose Psychedelic Insights, powered by the Conscious Fund. This is the Incognito series, casual psychedelic conversations on cognitive liberty.
Okay, so we're recording here. Sandhya, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Incognito. I think we're on 8 now.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Why don't you begin by just sort of introducing yourself to the audience and telling them a little bit about what you do in the psychedelic industry.
Yeah, so my name is Sandhya Prashad. I'm a psychiatrist in Houston, Texas. I specialize in treatment-resistant disorders and specifically using like what they call interventional modalities to help address those disorders. And ketamine in particular is an area of interest and specialty of mine. I've been using ketamine in my practice since 2016. And in 2016, I helped start the American Society of Ketamine Physicians, now also psychotherapists and practitioners, and I'm the current president. So those are just a few things about me and how ketamine is a big part of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. So one question I'm trying to ask on every one of these podcasts is, what's your favorite psychedelic and why? So is it safe to imagine it's ketamine, or is there another horse in the race?
Right. Yeah, that's where kind of my bread and butter is. And obviously my hope is that, we'll get the opportunity to learn more and use them more, like in, real mainstream medicine. But for now, I'd have to say it's ketamine.
For sure. So what was it that originally sort of drove you into the industry and got you interested in ketamine in the first place?
So I actually started my private practice almost 10 years ago, and I was outpatient psychiatry. I've always had an interest in treatment-resistant depression, and I was just doing, traditional psychiatry, traditional med management, and there was a patient that I had been seeing since early in my practice who was a young guy, had become very depressed actually and very suicidal, and I had tried a lot of complex treatments with him. I even hospitalized him. When he came out of the hospital, I would say he was worse, and in my gut I really felt this guy was motivated to act on his suicidal thoughts. People were just starting to talk about the fact that ketamine had these really profound anti-suicidal effects. So I started looking into it, and I reached out to an anesthesiologist that had been practicing, and she was like, come up and I will teach you. And that kind of started my journey with ketamine. But I literally started doing it out of almost a place of desperation for this particular patient. It absolutely changed his life. I mean, he has no depression now. I continue to treat him regularly, and he's doing amazing. But I really think not only did it change his life, I think it saved his life for sure. And then just started kind of offering it to other patients, and really took off. And I always say I could never go back, because it's such an amazing tool to really be able to help patients that in a way that we haven't been able to in psychiatry. So that part's been really exciting for me.
That's fascinating. And how long ago was that? You said 4 years, or?
That was 2016. Yeah, early 2016.
And how
going on.
So what was like your path to, obviously with the ASKP, and I think it was, Anthony that originally introduced us over at Ketamine Media. So, people like you are sort of helping pave the path forward for other practitioners, but how did you originally hear about it?
Yeah, so I, probably read about it in the literature and saw that these anti-suicidal effects. Reached out to this anesthesiologist, flew up to her office in Boston, and she taught me. When I came back, I was actually still kind of gun-shy to start treating him. And a couple months later, this same doctor said, hey, there's one conference for ketamine at this time. It was the KRIA conference out in San Francisco. And she said, why don't you come? And so I went out there and started learning more, met another anesthesiologist. And I was telling him, like, I was still scared to get started. And he said, hey, come out, I'll teach you. So I flew out to another person's practice, and then I came back and started my practice and started treating that guy in particular. It was at that meeting, at KRIA conference, that the founding members of ASKP met and felt that we needed a true scientific conference. So that was kind of the start of ASKP as a nonprofit organization that was there really to promote education and to kind of set good standards, and to create kind of a network and forum for people to to be able to collaborate. I think it's so important because this is such a new treatment. There's so much, I think, variability and customization that's needed to be able to really adapt it to your given patient, to really use it well. And, that's something we felt, people needed a network.
Yeah. And so can you maybe explain a little bit more, like if people are curious and they're practitioners and they want to get involved in the ASKP, that's a bit about the history, but moving forward, what does the ASKP do and how can people get involved?
A lot. We have hundreds of members now, which is really exciting. So we do, once a year, we do an annual conference, which is a scientific conference. We usually get some of the latest research that's going on, people that are doing interesting things with ketamine specifically, and so 2 days of presentation. People really enjoy the opportunity to also collaborate in small groups that we have there. We usually do a monthly webinar, and that's usually by Zoom. And people also get that opportunity to kind of talk and compare notes and chat. We're working on creating some educational, more actual formal educational curriculum, and publishing more guidelines, getting more membership involvement. So, people who are interested, like we're always looking for people who really want to be involved. And so our website's askp.org, but we have a lot of activities like that for our members.
Beautiful. And have you experienced like a lot of growth in the, let's say maybe even just the past year?
So we started off as this really small organization with no staff. I was the first secretary, and registering the organization and figuring out all that stuff. Now we have a full-time full-time staff, and we started off with just, I think it was 8 of us initially. And the other thing with ASKP is our goal is to just be inclusive. So it's all different specialties. It's not just physicians, but also psychotherapists and, like I said, practitioners. So we want to just be very open so people can learn from each other. So we started out with just that handful of us. And our conference last year, so this year, because of COVID, we did it online. But last year, our in-person conference, we had over 400 people attend. So tremendous growth. Our plan was probably that this year our conference was going to be bigger than last year, but with it not being in person,
COVID laughed at everyone's plans this year.
I know. So we're excited to be able to get people back together, in a room.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like that might be a different reality in 2021. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I could never practice this field in isolation, right? It took so much support and collaboration just to get started, but that helped me feel really comfortable to get started. It helped me grow as a practitioner. I just think it's really, really important to not practice in isolation, because there's so much ever evolving, I think, in this space, and learning how best to use it, and new tools and all of that. So I think it's really important.
And there's definitely like a tangible difference with, the in-person connection versus the virtual. As much as, they've stepped in and filled a spot, it doesn't, feel it just right.
There's the piece of, hey, you meet somebody that you then spend the evening and you have dinner with, and you guys are chatting all evening, and you're just that kind of networking.
Yeah,
I think is
genuine.
Right.
So you mentioned before we go on to our next topic, you mentioned that you use ketamine to help with treatment-resistant depression. But what other ailments have ketamine, or has ketamine proven to be effective with?
Yeah, so I think it's a very powerful tool with anyone who has any history of trauma. So PTSD specifically, it really is a tool that helps people do therapy also, right? If you can really add that therapy piece to it. So I think that's where you're seeing that profound effect with trauma and PTSD. People with just anxiety, some people with anxiety find some tremendous relief. I personally find that a lot of those people who have anxiety also have trauma. So probably you're treating an underlying PTSD there also. Some patients with OCD will also benefit from ketamine treatment. But those are, and then even bipolar depression. So it doesn't have to just be just regular depression, bipolar depression too, I think we see pretty profound effects. And then you can almost think of suicidality as a condition in and of itself, right? Because I think there's a very, very good chance patients with suicidality will notice it kind of decrease.
Interesting. So a pretty broad spectrum for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I would say pretty much just not, psychotic type disorders. But
So for the second third of this, we talk about sustainability. So just in a broad context, when I say sustainability, it can relate, to psychedelics or otherwise. What comes to mind for you right off the bat?
So sustainability, so personally, I think this is the future. I think this is where the field is going. And in some ways, thank goodness, because it's desperately needed newer modalities, newer ways of thinking. The same old is not working, in my opinion. So MDMA and psilocybin are being fast-tracked through the FDA. So I think that's super exciting. Those are going to be very available if they have FDA approval, right? So that will be very exciting. And then there's the nasal version of ketamine, esketamine, right? So that is FDA approved and covered by insurance. So it's definitely, it's interesting to see how the awareness has grown since back in 2016 when really there wasn't a whole lot of awareness. And since then it's, there's been a lot of big media pieces on ketamine and on the cover of Time magazine and all of that kind of stuff. So I think it's definitely sustainable. I think we're only going to continue to learn more and more about how to use this tool. And personally, I really think that with the right set of things, including the right therapy and everything, I think this treatment has the ability to be life-changing for so many, even those who have struggled for long, long periods of time. I think that's what makes it so rewarding to work with. So I hope, and I think it definitely has a lot of potential going forward. I know a lot of people are also investigating new psychedelics, so things that are not like even synthetic psychedelics. So I mean, I think there's a lot of growth here to happen. I think we're going to see tremendous growth and opportunity here in the next 10 years with this treatment.
With the pace that it's emerging and, obviously the demand will increase when, a treatment becomes more widely available. Is ketamine, a sustainable substance to produce? I'm pretty sure it's generally synthetic, right? So is there...
Synthetic. I mean, obviously the manufacturers are probably not used to having this kind of demand, but I would imagine they'd be able to, increase production. I know there was a while back that I think there was a hurricane somewhere in the Caribbean, and a lot of ketamine was, and fluids and things like that were manufactured there, and there are little pockets of time that it gets a little difficult. But I think, just from that perspective, it should be sustainable.
Okay, fair enough. And so just for people that might not know, exactly what is ketamine, how is it made, what's the process to get it to a finished formulation?
So, it is synthetic and it's a pharmaceutical. Obviously there's probably all sorts of fancy chemistry that goes into that, but I am not able to go into in detail, but my understanding is, so one thing is the ketamine itself is actually pretty cheap. So that's also something, it was created first in the 50s, right? As an anesthetic. And so it's, off patent, it's a generic. And so it's actually pretty available and cheap.
So it's interesting. So being off patent, is there, because there are people trying to, I think, create new formulations with ketamines and I guess new release modalities. Is that where you get like some sort of unique advantage?
The reason they have to do that is that the money that goes into R&D to bring a product to market is substantial, right? The FDA expects all of these studies to be done, safety data, all of this stuff to bring something to market, which is incredibly expensive. And an old generic drug that is already FDA approved for anesthesia and not, any kind of mood disorder, there's no money to be made on that, right? People often refer to ketamine as an orphan drug, And it's one of the reasons why IV ketamine in its, what we call racemic form, which is kind of those both hands, right? That it's, there's no money to be made in that formulation. So I think that's why you're seeing these intranasal formulations, esketamine, right? Because those are ways that, you can get an FDA approval. You could charge more for it, and get insurance paid for it, so on and so forth.
So is there a need to do that? Like, is it, is regular old ketamine, sort of a base, and then these things are actually improving upon the formulation or the chemistry, or what's happening there?
I mean, it's hard to say if things are an improvement. Sorry, we're breaking up a bit.
I think I got you back, so we'll just...
Okay, there we go. Okay, could you say that again? You were saying, the new formulations, are they actually improved?
Do they provide anything different? Are they improved upon? Or is it a different experience?
Not, right? I mean, it's more of a way around, trying to make some money off of it and being able to get FDA approval. There are not really head-to-head trials so much, but there's probably... Now, that being said, I say ketamine is cheap and all of that, but because it's not traditionally covered by insurance, the cost of the patient is expensive because you've got to pay for the doctor's time and the administration and being in the office for 2 hours and so on and so forth, right? And the supplies and the monitoring. So the benefit of us getting FDA approval and insurance coverage is that the cost, while the cost to insurance companies would be far greater than what patients are paying out of pocket, probably cash, it would be more accessible to patients and it would be cheaper for patients. So in my practice, I use, that's one of the reasons I actually use intranasal esketamine, right? I do feel like IV is significantly, I like the ability to be more flexible with it, use different doses, adjust the rate. And, I think it's definitely a better tool to use. I think it's more effective, but for some patients with insurance, they pay nothing to get a treatment with esketamine, right? So it allows a subset of the population to have access to treatment that I think is life-saving that would not otherwise have access to that treatment, right? IV ketamine is amazing, but it's expensive.
Right, and so giving people that option just sort of helps broaden that world of treatment possibilities.
And I think broadening access is an important thing here.
Absolutely, yeah. It's an often repeated topic across all of our conferences. Really, is just like, let's make sure that patient access comes first, and that we're broadening the scope of that because then more people will get help.
Yeah.
So on the third topic, it's the title of the podcast, "The Art of Being Incognito." So the definition of cognito is the philosophical principle that one's existence is demonstrated by the fact that one thinks, or the intellectual process of the self or the ego. So how do you kind of harness that power of being incognito and knowing who you are in your day-to-day with your patients or colleagues?
That's a super interesting question. I mean, I think, so you're saying incognito, not cognito, right?
So it's like being in that state of cognito.
Oh,
and it's
got it.
kind of
Incognito.
play on words of the internet browser where incognito is normally hiding things, and like that kind of thing.
Got it.
I like to play with my words.
Super interesting question, right? Because I think that ability to be cognito is at the root of what is needed to get the most out of a treatment like ketamine, right? I think if you can really be in that space, one of the things that I think is really important with ketamine treatment is almost to teach people how to do ketamine, if you will, right? Like teach them to sort of sit with their thoughts, follow their train of thought, have like a curiosity about it while they're getting treatment. And that I think is that definition of like cognito, right? Like, and not to fight it. So I think actually that's super, super important for this treatment. You asked, how do I stay cognito? I think really, I'm very, very involved with my patients. I talk a lot to them about their experiences. I even do some therapy during treatments. And I've really done a lot of the building of my practice myself. Like when I started out, I didn't even have a nurse. I just kind of sat in with everybody. And I really kind of did bully, those sort of things. Yeah, they really allowed me to be cognito, right? To really be there with the patient, understand what they were experiencing. I think it gave me such valuable insight into this treatment that I would not have had otherwise, short of, getting ketamine yourself, right? Which is frowned upon for a physician, I suppose. So, but I think just being really present with your patients and trying to encourage them to do the same, I think is how you can get the most out of this treatment.
And so have you found that process of, sitting with your patients and really being there in the experience and almost experiencing their, process of ego and self kind of altering and diminishing, has that affected you over the past 4 years and kind of who you are?
I mean, absolutely. I think it's probably really affected how I look at things and sort of process things. It's been fascinating patient population to treat because so many people, they come with depression, but they've experienced profound traumas in their life, right? Patients that a spouse died at a young age, or a child died, or there are those sort of experiences that they haven't processed, and watching their journey of processing that, I think, gives you a real sense of just gratitude, really, right? And the ability to, I think, be more in the moment as well. I mean, I'll share on here. I don't normally share too publicly, but I'm a stage 4 cancer survivor, and so this getting into this field came for me after I had recovered from cancer, and it couldn't be a better time because I think it was really important. After something like that, one of my mentors says, I got to look death in the eye and walk away, right? So you get this feeling of, I need to feel very purposeful, right? And
it's like you got your second chance kind of thing.
Yeah, and this gave me that. I felt very purposeful. I felt like this is where I'm supposed to be. I feel like I'm really making a difference in people's lives. And I think seeing that process for other patients too, and how they were exploring those sorts of things, allowed me to kind of see those pieces of my own life, to be honest.
Yeah, interesting. And so if I may ask a personal question, have you used ketamine in a therapeutic sense to kind of deal with those previous traumas and that?
For myself, no, I haven't.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. But so that's something that you can see actually, affect other. Have you kind of run into people on a similar path?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And really seeing, I think the truth is, I think we all have little traumas like that, things that we haven't fully processed, things that if we were able to truly sit with them, process them, let them go, they wouldn't have that kind of hold over us. And I've absolutely seen that with patients. And the truth is, probably anybody could benefit from that kind of process. Just like they say anybody could benefit from therapy.
Or meditation or yoga.
I think if you could really do that therapy with it and sit with it and follow through your own pieces with the use of ketamine, it's I think anybody could benefit from that.
It's interesting to, because one of the counterpoints to a lot of these psychedelic treatments would be like, well, why do I need drugs to do therapy, or isn't that kind of counterproductive? Don't you want to be sort of in a clean state of mind and, really know yourself?
Yeah, and this is why things like this podcast, I think, are so useful, right? To really get that word out that I think we are defended and guarded against some of these things. And ketamine and other psychedelics allows us to sort of see things from a different perspective and process it in a different way. I cannot tell you how many times a therapist has been working with a patient for years, and then we'll do treatment for 2 weeks, and they'll call me and they're like, they've done more therapy in 2 weeks than they have in 2 years, right? It's just, Raquel Bennett, who started the Korea Institute, right? She calls ketamine a lubricant for therapy. And I think that's a great way to word that. And that's why I also think anybody could kind of benefit from it, because we are kind of stuck in the ways we see things and process things because of our defenses, right? And so if you're able to
internal dialogue,
and start saying, oh, I could think of that in a different way, right?
Yeah. And it's almost like taking, like what they say is it disassociates, right? So it helps you kind of come to out here and look at yourself and be like, well, why am I thinking that? You know?
I've seen is like I have a patient who kind of would gravitate towards just the emotion of anger all the time, right? And so often under anger is a much more complex set of emotions, but she couldn't experience those. But almost immediately, we could start talking about her experiences with other people and sort of see it from their perspective and have empathy for them in a way that she couldn't otherwise, right? And then also process her own sadness that was leading to some of that anger. And I mean, that was just not something she was able to process in therapy at all up until that point.
Because of the traditional mindset that she'd maintained, kind of thing, right?
Right, exactly. And she just could not access those emotions. And I think it was very freeing and liberating for her to be able to do that.
That's fascinating. And so if you don't mind sharing, what's the most transformative experience that you've seen somebody go through with their own thoughts or ego, or, you know, whatever it happens to be? What's the wildest 180 you've seen with ketamine treatment?
I mean, there's a lot of them, but one that really stands out is I have a patient that found her mother after she had completed suicide. And through ketamine, she really processed it and was able, I think, to sort of forgive her and understand the struggles that she was in and where she was coming from, and really process it in a way that allowed her to kind of release it, if you will, right? A lot of people will say that the trauma doesn't feel so stuck to them after a treatment, right? That they can work past it and let it go. And then this same patient would say that she kind of felt like she was almost reparenting herself through the process of using ketamine also, which was in a gentler way, right? Like in a way of being more permissive and not, you know, so rigid and things like that. So, I mean, I think for her, it was really, really, I realize I'm not probably expressing just but being there in that moment, it was
that's something you have to feel, probably.
Yeah, it was literally, I think, re-experiencing the moment.
Yeah, but in a different state. Yeah, so it's
exactly.
Almost, in a sense, it could be, you know, labeled as like an empathy enhancer.
Absolutely. And the thing that's interesting about that, though, is obviously this is a trauma that's coming back up, and I think if you're not willing to sit with that, your initial inclination is to push that away, right? That's something that's traumatic. And that's where people have to learn to use it, right? Is to say, okay to go there.
Permission to go within.
Yeah, permission to go within, absolutely. And not be scared of it, right? A therapist once told me a lot of anxiety is running from an unpleasant emotion, right? If we learn to say, I am feeling this way because of this, and process through it, it often doesn't have that same hold over us, right? So this is kind of
giving it that space that it needs.
Right, exactly.
Otherwise it gets louder and louder and louder, and it tries to tear down that wall that you've been building.
Many patients will say, I don't even know I am anxious, right? Because they haven't gone within to say, what is causing me to feel this way? And maybe they're guarded from that, they're not able to.
That's incredible. Well, yeah. I want to thank you for coming on. We always have insightful conversations on this podcast, and I appreciate you taking some time today. If people want to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was saying thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. If anyone watching this didn't get enough and would like to reach out and get in touch, how would they find you on the great interwebs?
My website, so www.sprashad, so sprashadmd.com is probably the easiest way. I have an email on there and everything.
Beautiful. Awesome. And we'll be sure to include that in the podcast details when it's published. And thank you again for coming on and sharing. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Patrick.
No worries.
Thanks for joining the Incognito series, brought to you by Microdose and the Conscious Fund. Visit our website at www.microdose.buzz.